Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Angel Eduardo. Angel is a writer. He recently had a piece out for Center for Inquiry, and it was about this new thing called starmanning, which I think I'm going to try to straw man later, but we'll see. And then he also had a really good piece out in Newsweek. Was it last week? Uh, about basically getting rid of standards in education. And I'll put the links to both those in the description. Hey, Angel, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so I mean, we interact a little bit on Twitter, and I think like you were one of those people where I'd always see your stuff on my timeline, but I just kind of assumed I was following you, but I turned out I wasn't.
That happens to me too.
But yeah, I mean, so like with the star manning, I'm going to see if I can got this correct. And I reread that again earlier today just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. Now,
Mm.
basically, it's trying to take the idea of steel manning and then moving it up, like ratcheting it up to 11 type of thing. So you are starting off from the basis of looking for commonality, and you're trying to ascribe the best intentions possible at the same time as trying to come up with the best version of, I don't want to say your opponent, but the person you're speaking with, best version of their viewpoint. So have I got
Mm.
that correct, or am I?
Yeah, pretty much. I've been calling it, just as I've been talking about it and explaining it. I got to calling it a kind of rhetorical handshake, right? Where the origin of the handshake, as far as I understand it, is I'm extending my open hand to you to show you that I don't have a weapon, and you're doing the same thing, and we're clasping our hands together as a kind of, it's a deal. There's going to be no warfare here. We're just going to engage. Um, so it's a kind of argumentative version of that, where by taking the time to explicitly acknowledge the other person's good intentions, you're assuming it. You're assuming good intentions, right? But uh, I'm of the opinion that that is a really, really safe assumption to make. Like 99% of the time, probably even more than that. It's probably like 99.99% of the time, people are at least trying to do what they think is the right thing to do, even if they're mistaken. And so you're just kind of acknowledging that in
Okay,
order to establish a kind of common ground of like, look, we are engaging in a similar project, right? We're trying to improve things, whatever the specific thing we're talking about here is. And that's your motivation for whatever the argument is that you're making. You want to make society better. You want to make the world better. You want to improve race relations. You want to improve schooling, whatever it is, right? That's what you're trying to do here, and I acknowledge that. And now let me try to see if I understand your argument on that basis, and then maybe I can disagree with you, but at the very least I'm acknowledging, you're not a monster. I don't think you're trying to destroy the world, right? I don't think you're this mustache twirling, stereotypical old school villain. I think you're just a person trying to do what they can, or trying to do their best.
okay. Now I'm going to take this to a very far extreme, and I know in like I think it was a blog post for Center for Inquiry. I mean, you talked about Daryl Davis. I mean, and hats off to the guy. Like, I don't have that courage. Like, I honestly don't. Like,
Right. Yeah.
um, but yeah, like I get that. But let's take someone like Al Baghdadi. Right
Hmm.
now, if you want to take the claims of ISIS, or if you want to take the claims of Salafi Islam and that extreme literalist fundamentalist view of it,
Hmm.
yes, they want a good world, but what they describe as a good world is
Hmm.
it's pretty horrific unless you ascribe to that particular worldview. And so I can, yes, you could look at Baghdadi and say, yes, you believe you want a good world,
Hmm.
but and yes, he wants his kids to have food and, blah, 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 blah. Like the basics that everyone wants. Like, I'm not denying any of that,
Hmm.
but what he describes as a good world has to be said straight out. Like, no, I'm sorry, but that's not good, and
Oh yeah.
it has to be explained. I mean, throwing gays off, the 12th story of a building because they're gay. I mean, that's not conducive to a good society. And that has to be able to be said openly and plainly. And yes, okay, fine. You can go in there with saying you believe you want a good world. Again, take it to another extreme. Hitler wanted a good world, okay, only for certain people, and that's what he thought what a good world would be. I mean, I'm not. There's no defensive Hitler here. Like, I'm not saying, but again, like, so I'll speak with anyone, and I can sit down with them and say, look, I think you want that, but I'm going to be brutally honest about what I think about their worldview. And okay, I'm going to give you a less extreme example of this. And so before COVID locked everything down, there's a pub near my place, and every Monday night they play cribbage there. So it's a stodgy old person's game. So I go there and I hang out. It's a friendly little pub, right? So like the setting matters as well. And hang out with a bunch of people for a couple hours and we play cards. Now there'd been this woman who was coming to the pub as well, but not for that. And one night, one of the guys who was playing cribbage started talking about neutrinos, and that interested me. So I went into the conversation. She was there. And then later on, we went and got into politics. And we didn't agree on much, but we talked back and forth. And then just before COVID closed everything down, I think we were talking politics, and like the way Elizabeth Warren was saying, here are my pronouns, this and that. I said, yeah, that's kind of fake. And then we got into that discussion. She was late 30s to early 40s somewhere. I don't know her exact age. And, she said, blah, 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 I identify as queer. And we started talking about that. Now, I'd actually, because I was really curious and wanted to know what some of this stuff was, I spent a lot of time and I read a lot of mainly critical race theory and intersectionality, but I also read some gender and queer theory. And so I said, well, look, can I ask you some questions? And I told her, like, this is where I'm coming from. And I told her, like, I'm coming from an Enlightenment perspective, and I think this stuff is wrong on these things, but I want to ask you some questions. And I just got her to try to explain to me why Pete Buttigieg wasn't really a gay man because he didn't embrace his queerness, but he was only a man who slept with other men. Now, she believed this stuff. She was earnest. And, in the course of explaining it to me, and I kept her away from the jargon. I said, just do it plainly. Now, I'm not saying I changed her mind or anything, but she started laughing at herself when she was giving that explanation in plain language. So, okay, I fully admit that I'm a bit of an asshole on Twitter sometimes, but whatever. I mean, I'd rather just sit on Twitter and make fart jokes, man. Honestly, that's all I really want to do. But talking face to face or even talking like this, but I think you have to be honest about where you're coming from as well. Like, I don't want to go in there saying this is going to be kumbaya. Yes, I'll respect I'll respect your right to have your point of view. I'll try to understand it as best as I can. I'll acknowledge that in your mind that you think you're doing something good, but like, again, take it to the extreme of al-Baghdadi. That's antithetical to everything I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
And
me too.
And I would want to make that clear. And
yeah.
So it's I'm not like, again, maybe I read it wrong, and maybe I was just looking at it the wrong way. But it to me, it just seemed like pacifist, a pacifism version of dialogue, or it's a pacifist dialectic type of thing.
No, not at all. Not at all. I agree with everything you just said. Even down to what your positions are. I'm coming from the same place as you. It's not about acquiescence, and it's not about kumbaya. Definitely not. It's definitely not about just play nice. It's definitely not about that. It's about connection and understanding, compassion. It's about that. So it's about, I vehemently disagree with al-Baghdadi, right? Like, I couldn't possibly disagree more with that ideology, right? I couldn't possibly, I can't imagine how much further I can get from it. But because I understand that he believes what he believes, and because he believes what he believes, everything that he thinks and does is rational. It's perfectly rational from his point of view, right? That understanding is a way in. And kind of like what, the example you gave about this person you were talking to about queer theory and all that sort of stuff. Um, there was, if she saw you as an enemy, if she saw you as this person is here to destroy my sense of being, this person is here to erase me, or this person is uh, a monster who's trying to hurt me, she wouldn't have been as open, and she wouldn't have been as, to the point where she's laughing about the things that she's saying, and you're disarming her in a way by being cordial, right? You don't have to agree. You can disagree vehemently, right? So I've been talking to people about this, and I liken it to, it's kind of like how I disagree with my siblings, right? My brothers are my best friends,
All right.
and and we disagree on all kinds of stuff all the time, to the point where we raise our voices, we're gesturing wildly, sometimes we're pacing around, right? We're really animated and we get into it, right? And we're disagreeing hardcore and we're breaking each other down, and we've gotten to this point where we're really, we love doing it. It's almost fun to kind of dig into this thing and keep pushing and pushing and pushing, right? But there is no point during that exchange, no matter how heated the exchange itself is, that I wouldn't pause and give my brother a hug and say I love you, right? Because we understand that what's actually happening here is the ideas are fighting, but we are not fighting, right? Like, as human beings, I'm not denying them as a human being. They're not denying me as a human being, right? So we can vehemently be opposed to each other in terms of the ideas and the ideologies and where we're coming from. The idea of starmanning is just kind of laying that on the table and saying, look, I don't think you're a monster. I understand where you're coming from, or at least I want to understand where you're coming from. And I know that you're coming from a place where, based on what you know and what you believe, you're doing what you think is right. I disagree with it, right? I can tell you why I think you're wrong about what you're doing, but I don't doubt that you're doing it because you think it's the right thing to do, and that you're not, basically it's just very, 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 very few people in the world are consciously acting to make it a worse place to live, right?
Okay,
And
yeah,
even if they're mistaken.
I'll give you that, but someone like a Joel Olstein,
Hmm.
okay, he knows he's scamming people.
Yeah,
Okay,
he
he's
has to.
okay. So I'm not gonna think Joel Olstein's out there trying to make the world a better place.
I
Like, I mean,
think,
I mean, he's preaching that, and
right.
he's selling that fantasy.
Hmm.
And maybe to some people out there, they get a feeling of fulfillment, and that enriches their life in a way. But he's not really, like, the seed faith thing is not really making poor people's lives better by getting them to send all their money to this guy. And
Yeah,
he
for sure.
knows he's not doing that. Like, so there has to be a point where, you know, like I said, al-Baghdadi, which is going to sound weird because Joel Osteen's hasn't done anything near the level of al-Baghdadi, but
Hmm.
al-Baghdadi believed in that version of Islam where if the whole world was Muslim, and it had to be Sunni Muslim, it couldn't be Shia, right? They treated the Shia worse than they treated the Christians and the Jews.
Yeah.
Um, so it had to be that version of Islam, and if the whole world was that, then there would be peace everywhere, and that's what he wanted. Joel
Mhm.
Osteen wants another mansion and another jet, and he knows he's bilking people. Like, Bernie Madoff knew he was
Hmm.
bilking people. So,
Yep.
like, I mean, there's no way I can look at Bernie Madoff and say you tried to make the world a better place. Yeah, he made some
No,
people richer,
but
but
he thinks that what he's doing is justified. There's some mechanism that he's applying, right? Even Joel Osteen. It's funny that you started with al-Baghdadi,
Yeah.
and then Hitler immediately comes up, right?
Yeah.
And these people who are um, the pinnacle of just heinous human behavior,
Yeah.
right? Just awful, awful.
Yeah.
And ever since I started talking about this idea, those are the people that everyone keeps bringing up, right? And what's interesting to me about it is that those people are actually easier to starman because their ideology is so clear and the math is so easy to see on paper, right? But somebody like Joel Osteen, it's a little bit more complicated, right? Because he's got to be conscious of the fact that he is a crook and that he is totally swindling people, right? And so what's going on there? That's harder. It's harder to
Yeah.
dig in a little bit and find what's going on in his brain where he just what he's doing to the point where he can sleep at night, right? And that's where it gets interesting. And it's kind of like you just mentioned that um, the Sunni and the Shia treat each other worse, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Or
because they're actually they're more closely related than they are to Christians and Jews, but they treat each other worse, right?
yeah. And
And I think that's the thing. It's that narcissism of small difference, and it becomes more difficult to understand why someone who is closer to you doesn't think exactly the same way as you. So, but the thing is, somebody like Bernie Madoff, I'm sure I can just I can suppose that he had some kind of point of view where it's like, listen, it's dog eat dog. I'm smart. It's morally wrong to let a sucker keep his money, right? I'm sure that he has some version of that point of view, and he thinks that's the best way to be. He thinks, well, listen, everybody should try to be like that, and whoever wins wins. Dog eat dog. I bet that he has some version of that going on in his head, and it's totally ridiculous and it's unsustainable. And part of what makes it easy for me to personally refute stuff like that is because that sort of behavior doesn't scale, right? So it would be easy for me to demonstrate how that ideology that he has only works because everyone else disagrees with it, or most people disagree with it, and he's taking advantage of that fact, right?
okay, but
But either way, now you know we've moved from this idea of like, okay, I get why you're doing what you're doing, I get what your motivations are, but let me explain to you why I think it's wrong, right? So we shift from there. I just think that and these are kind of extreme cases, edge cases. There might be some sociopathy going on that makes it a little more complicated, right? But you're unlikely to meet these types of people in general. Most of the time, you're just going to be talking to somebody who disagrees with you about abortion or
yeah,
disagrees with you about gun control. You know,
no,
that's
no,
that's the majority of what you're going to be dealing with. You're
no,
not really going to be dealing with a Joel Osteen or
oh,
or a Bernie Madoff,
no,
and you're
no.
definitely almost never going to be dealing with an al Baghdadi or a Hitler, right?
Okay, yeah, no, no. I
So,
like. I wanted to start off like like I said, the personal example I gave you about was about one, the Buttigieg thing, and I know, like, I acknowledge I'm going to the extremes here, but with Bernie Madoff, if what he's believing is this is dog eat dog, this is okay. You can understand his beliefs, you can understand his thinking. It's he like you can understand why he's doing it. You can understand like his reasoning, and you can give him a his motivation. But I still at that point can't. He's doing what's good for himself. He's not. There's like there is no good intention there. There's you know okay, the Westboro Baptist Church, the
mhm.
uh, the grandfather, I forget his name. He had some good intentions, and it's
Red Phelps, yeah.
yeah, but so you can see those good intentions. Whereas Bernie Madoff, like his intentions are, I'm going to live this way to help myself.
Hmm.
It's not to improve the lives of anyone else. It's just to help me. So
Right.
I, this is where maybe you lose. Like I try to understand why he's doing it. I can try to be sympathetic to the reasons that led up to it, but I cannot ascribe to him good intentions.
Yeah. I think, well, I think part of the thing is shifting frameworks, right? Because as far as he's concerned, that is the right way to be. And as far as he understands it, this is good, right? He's shifting the definition in his own mind, right, to something that most people would disagree with. But he has the justification himself. He's walking around saying, no, I'm doing what's best, because what's best is you look out for yourself. Everyone else is not my problem, right? So that's a flawed philosophy, but that's what the philosophy is. So you don't have to agree with it because it's, but
Mm.
you you definitely um, you will get further by understanding it.
Yeah.
And that's really all it is that I'm trying to argue. You don't have to agree.
No,
You
no,
just have to kind of. It's just it will be impossible to steel man somebody's argument, and by that I mean it would be impossible to understand what someone is arguing, right? Be able to repeat it to them in a way that they would agree with if you see them as something other than, a human being just like you,
oh,
right? If you see them as a monster, if you see them as someone who is out to get you, someone who is out to destroy you because they're pure evil, it's going to be so much harder to even understand where they're coming from. And again, I'm talking mostly about your day-to-day interactions, right? The
yeah,
the type of people you're likely to encounter most of the time. So we talk about edge cases and we talk about these weird,
yeah.
you know, these excesses, but you know, it's going to work most of the time because most of the time you're not talking to psychopaths and sociopaths
Okay, no,
and
no, I
you know
get that 100%. Like
uh,
I,
insane sociopathic
yeah,
criminals like
yeah,
the people
no,
we're
okay,
talking about now.
yeah. I mean, hopefully, you, like, hopefully, you never have to. Um, but okay, like day to day activities, you know, you're in the grocery store, you bump to someone's shopping cart, you apologize or whatever. You're standing in a long line, you start talking to someone. Yeah, fine. I mean, or it's a work acquaintance or friend of a friend type of thing. Yeah, I mean, in your day to day life, if you're out with friends and you're playing cards and there's someone else there and you voted Biden, they voted Trump. Yeah, that person. No, I mean, obviously, you should not assume that that person's a monster. That's not what I'm
Mhm.
getting at. Like that. Why did you vote for Trump or whatever the difference is? Like why do you like pineapple on pizza? It's gross. Like like something even as silly as that, right? Like it's.
Yeah.
But yeah, they want their kids to go to school. They want to have a decent, comfortable living. They don't want to be robbed. They're not going out to rob people. They're just the average person. They've
Hmm.
you know just like everyone else, good days, bad days. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I get that. Like I'm just gonna kind of try to shift from here to your other piece, but like a
Hmm.
conversation around like something that was in your Newsweek piece about the standardized scores and all that, and like the
Hmm.
meritocracy and everything. Like it is, the stuff is religious, like, and the thing John McWhorter's writing right now, like that he's putting out on his Substack, The Elect, like I think he's doing a really good job with it. But I mean, McWhorter can acknowledge that yes, okay, you are thinking you're doing good,
Hmm.
but you're not. And I mean, he can list off the ways in which Kendi's version of anti-racism is quite racist and it's quite harmful.
Hmm.
And I mean, McWhorter can list that off. And again, like I know these are, I'm trying to take it to extreme case, but I'm saying for like the conversations that really, really matter, I don't think you can just say, well, you're trying to make the world a better place. I know you said you can criticize them and everything, but it's just like,
It seems like
I
too much of a give.
it's it's not so much too much of a give. It's okay. So like, stay on the religious thing. So when Sam Harris was debating Reza Aslan or
Hmm.
Hitchens was debating Tariq Ramadan, or you can go to like, William Lane Craig or any of these people.
Hmm.
Um, they they weren't there to convince, neither Sam Harris or Reza Aslan was trying to convince each other. They were trying to convince the people in the audience
Yeah.
who weren't firmly in either camp.
Hmm.
Now, I know a debate is kind of a different situation, but when you're having like when someone like a McWhorter is having a discussion with Kendi, or Nicole Hannah Jones, like pick anyone from that camp and pick anyone from like McWhorter's side, right? So just
Mm-hmm.
like they each know where they're coming from. They each have an idea, but again, like I think that like maybe it's got to be in the background or something that yes, we acknowledge this, but we're coming here to discuss why we think the other person's wrong or something. It's just,
Yeah.
I think there's,
I mean, that's the thing is we're kind of, um, the way that I see it is that, yeah, this is what the reason we're here, right?
Mhm.
Is to talk about these ideas, talk about your point of view versus my point of view, hash it out, figure out what makes the most sense, and yeah, I'm not necessarily here to convince you, but I'm here to air my criticisms of your point of view for the benefit of the audience, right? So John McWhorter and Ibram Kendi are talking. McWhorter is laying out, he's like, I read your book. This is what I understand of your argument. This is why I think it's wrong, right? The problem is that so much of the conversation gets hijacked by this feeling of, I need to destroy this person because he's trying to destroy me. And it becomes more about that than it does about the ideas themselves. It becomes that the people and the ideas are indistinguishable from each other. And, you see it all the time. It's the way that our discourse is kind of framed, like John McWhorter destroys Kendi, right?
okay, no, like that's another thing too, like the destroying and all that, that's just silly.
Yeah,
Like owning the libs and all that garbage.
right.
And again, like debate was the wrong term, and it should be like watching, like I said, the religious debates, whatever, those are kind of fun just to listen to the arguments and everything, but
Right.
it should be more of like a dialectic. And it's,
Yeah.
are we
Right.
trying to get to a truth? And,
Yes.
you know, so Kendi wants less racism. John McWhorter wants less racism. Like they can
Hmm.
both agree on that. Racism is bad. We should have as little of it as possible.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't think you'll ever get rid of it, but curtail it as much as you can.
Hmm.
Um,
And now, but imagine if they actually agreed to that. Imagine if
okay.
both of them acknowledge that the other feels that way, right?
Okay.
Imagine how different the conversation would go. Because right now, I mean, Kendi has called John McWhorter a racist.
Yeah. But
So,
that's, that,
you
that,
know, we're automatically now on we're not on common ground. Now we're automatically like, no, this person is the personification of the problem that I'm trying to solve,
yeah,
right?
but see, that's where someone like Kendi loses me, because okay, this is
Right.
again, I'm going to keep this in the religious context, because I believe in the right of everyone to have their faith. You know, like I shouldn't stop anyone from believing what they want to believe. They shouldn't stop me from believing what I believe. But that's a personal, private thing. I don't want anyone to force their beliefs onto me. Now, a Salafi Muslim is not going to afford me that.
Right.
A Salafi Muslim, probably a 50-50 chance that might want to like slice my head off. Yes, I will grant him that you think that the caliphate will bring a great world.
Mm-hmm.
I'll grant him all that,
But you
but
can't let him slice your head off.
I can't let him slice my head off.
Right. Yeah. No.
But
No.
I have to
I'm not.
allow him to. I have to allow him to give me the respect to hold my beliefs, because I mean, that is
Yeah. Well, that would be nice, right? But if he's hell bent on slicing your head off, then conversation can't happen, right? So at that point, you're just trying to mitigate the situation, right? You're just like, look, I need to stop you because you're going to try to hurt me, and conversation is the last thing on your mind, right?
but I mean, okay, with someone like that,
Mm-hmm.
there, like, okay, someone like Ibram Kendi,
Mm-hmm.
if you go through his worldview, McWhorter is not being anti-racist, so therefore he is racist.
Right.
That is Kendi's world. I mean, I'm not strong. Like, I'm not making anything up there. Like that's basically his worldview, right? So,
Well, I mean, he kind of. I haven't read his book yet. I have it. I haven't read it, but but I've read, his essays, and I've watched a few videos of him talk, and I've seen him interact with people on Twitter, and he kind of jumps around with this, but he maintains, at least officially, that um, people aren't racist. They're either being racist or anti-racist, right?
Yeah,
So I think he would say that John McWhorter is constantly being
being
racist,
racist. Okay,
and that it's not the person, it's the behavior that
okay,
that counts. But I've seen him kind of shift from that a little bit when when cornered or when
yeah,
he's speaking freely. So
okay. So yeah, that is a okay. That is a distinction, but yeah, like I didn't phrase it correctly, but yeah, that's
no, but I take your point though.
yeah. So so my understanding, like, so like, I'm not saying Kendi's going to talk with me, whatever, but if but that, like, my understanding was worldview, and I'm not lying or making it up, or
Hmm.
I'm going to come in on that from, like, here's why you're wrong, or here's why your whole premise is wrong,
Sure.
because like I said, yes, you think you're going to bring about a better world. Okay,
Hmm.
I can acknowledge that. I can
Yeah.
acknowledge that in a lot of people,
Hmm.
but I mean, your whole starting point is wrong. Like, okay, I equated this to this once, and I said it's like if you had two people proposing a solution to get rid of homelessness in
Hmm.
Boulder. Okay, like, I didn't want to pick a huge city, just a smaller city. Um, One person comes up, says, "Okay, my plan is going to take 10 years, and it's going to cost $50 million, and we're going to get rid of the underlying causes, and homelessness will be non-existent, and we'll stop people from going homeless before they become homeless." Whatever great plan. Everyone's like, "Okay, that's very cool." Next guy comes up and says, "I've got a plan. It's going to take 1 year, and it's going to cost $5 million." Now, the city's obviously going to listen to this because it's
Right.
faster and cheaper. Now, that guy says, "Well, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to go hire a bunch of mercenaries, and we're going to go through the city, and we're going to take out every homeless person. There,
Hmm.
homeless problem solved." Now,
Yep.
that's, again, I'm going insane here, but when I hear what Kendi says about anti-racism,
Hmm.
to me, that's the equivalent of saying we're going to go out and kill every homeless person to get rid of homelessness.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I understand what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, it's really just like, you mentioned, like, I can acknowledge that he thinks he's doing the best thing that he can do to rid the world of this problem that he sees, right? The only thing that I'm advocating for is making that explicit. So, if I were actually to sit down with Kendi and talk to him, right? That would be one of the first things that I would do, just to show him that I'm not simply here to bash him or misunderstand him or destroy, his personhood, ruin his career. That's not what I'm out to do, right? I I just make it explicit. I put it on the table and I just say, "Look, I get that your motivation for all of this is you want to make the world a better place. You want to make, equality happen, right? You see it as not happening at all, or not happening enough, and you want to fix that problem. I totally feel that, and I want to fix that same problem, right? So now we can talk. Now I'm not your enemy. We have a common goal, and I'm just setting it up that way. It's a I don't want to call it a tactic, because it's not meant to be strategic. It's meant to be genuine. It's meant to be honest. You're just putting it out on the table so that both of you understand that the other is, or even if it's just you, like, I do it even if other people don't extend me the same courtesy. I do it because I think this is the best way. This is what's most important. Like, people want to be heard and they want to be understood, right? And especially somebody like Kendi, who is constantly being spoken about, right? And constantly being criticized. I have no trouble believing that he's going to enter any engagement with anybody with his arms up, his defenses are up. He's going to be, expecting just blades just thrown at him immediately, right? And what I would do is just say, "Hey, look, I'm not out to hurt you, man. If you convince me, great. But as of right now, I think you're wrong. But I know that what you're trying to do is fix something. And the thing you want to fix, I also want to fix. I have different ideas about how to do that. And so now we can talk about what your idea is, how I understand it, and whether I disagree. And then, I can throw my ideas against yours and see what happens, right? None of this requires that he reciprocate, right? In order for me to do it. But obviously the conversation will be more productive if he does. Um, but it's just about taking that extra step, because I notice that we can't assume it anymore. We can't assume that extra step, right? A lot of people are walking around being compassionate and just assuming, like, look, I know this person is just misguided or whatever. According to me, this person is misguided, but they think they're doing the right thing. They're just wrong, right? And then they just jump straight to the arguments. But the other person might think, oh, this person's coming to attack me, right? So, especially because so much conversation is happening on the internet, you lose the face to face thing, you lose the gestures, you lose the facial, the sort of small facial, indicators, you lose tone, you lose all these things, right? So, this is kind of a corrective for that, to say, let me make this as clear as possible, that I come in peace, and all I'm concerned with are the ideas that you're espousing. All I'm not out to ruin you or destroy you, right? I don't think you're a monster. I just think you're wrong. And once you do that, you've kind of set up this paradigm where there's no need for the person to feel personally attacked, because you've already kind of edified them. You've already kind of said, look, I see you as a person. I see who you are. And I feel your intentions. I feel your motivation. I understand them, and I agree with them. And now we're just going to get into the details.
See, like, okay, I have no problem, like, even with, like I said, someone who I completely vehemently disagree with. I have no problem starting from that standpoint and saying,
Mm-hmm.
okay, look, you know what? You think you're trying to do good and you think you're trying to achieve X. I also want to achieve X, but here's where we differ, and here's where we're going to think each other's wrong or whatever, and
Right.
start off from. I know, I that's fine, but
Mm-hmm.
again,
That's pretty much all it is.
yeah. But now I'm not. I okay. It doesn't matter that you know the other your interlocutor doesn't give it back to you. Like, fine. That's I'm all good with that.
Mm-hmm.
But at certain points, like, okay, if you are speaking with someone from a fundamentalist faith,
Yep.
questioning the tenets of the faith to them, even if you say, I think you're doing good, is questioning their personhood,
Yeah.
because they are their faith.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm looking at this stuff like a religion, and some of the people who are coming out of, like, now it's getting into K through 12. It has been for a couple of years, but it's been in high schools for since about 2010 in certain high schools in certain districts. I'm not saying it's, um,
Yeah.
but it's in a lot more colleges. So I'm looking at it as converts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've seen converts to Islam, and the converts for the first 4 or 5 years are the most zealous.
Right.
And so when you question, like, when you hear something like curing a deaf person of their deafness is a genocide on the deaf identity. And I mean, these are serious statements here from quote unquote serious people.
Yeah, I've heard them.
Okay. Now,
Mhm.
there's not much way to talk about transableism and deafness when, even if you tell them that you think that they're, like, even if you convince them that you think that they're coming from a good place, right? And
Mhm.
and you're meaning it sincerely, and you're not being sarcastic or anything about it. You're being sincere, and they believe you that you're being sincere. When you come up to someone who is that faithful, like, that religious, and you attack that tenet of their faith, right away they think you're attacking them.
Mhm.
And I mean, like, I think you have to be aware of that as well going in. Like,
Oh, sure.
these conversations are not going to be easy. They are going to be rough.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Basically, it's, yeah, I mean, you're pointing to um, yeah, you're pointing to the crux of the issue, right? But it's just, if I can at least get this person to not feel threatened by me, right? So if somebody, if we're talking about somebody like this, right? Somebody where, let's bring it back to like you know um, a freshly converted Muslim,
Mhm.
right? And they're really fervent, super zealous, right? They're, I mean, it's actually more interesting because those people can't wait to tell you about everything they think and everything they believe, right? And so curiosity is a big thing, right? Going in with curiosity, and at least in your own mind, just saying, okay, this person has this set of beliefs. I think those beliefs make no sense, but let me just probe further. Let me understand how this person understands what they believe, right? I understand it my way. Let me understand it their way. And let me ask them, right? So one of the questions that somebody posed to me was I forget his name now, but the 9/11 hijacker, the main one.
Oh
Uh,
God.
I forget his name, but basically someone was like, "All right, it's September 10th, 2001, and you just sat down with this guy and he's explaining to you what he's about to do, right? How do you starman that, right?" And like like I mentioned, it's easy to starman this person because the ideology is so clear, right? But then you move to the next step of like, okay, but can you actually get anywhere with this person by doing that? Can you convince them, right? And I would approach this person with curiosity, right? Like, I'm familiar with Islam, but I haven't read the Quran. I've never practiced, right? So there's no way I know it better than they know it. At least what they know, I don't know it as well as they do. So I would be like, okay, well, look, I get that the reason you think what you're thinking and the reason you want to do what you want to do is because you believe it is the interpretation of the scripture that you understand, but I don't understand it. Can you walk me through it? And I would just start asking questions, right? So kind of like what you did with this person, you were talking about queer ideology, right? You basically did the Denzel Washington in Philadelphia thing, where he's like, explain this to me like I'm 4 years old, right? Don't give me jargon because I don't understand. Just explain it to me like I'm the dumbest person you've ever met, and let me see if I can get you here. And she started doing it. She started explaining it to you, right? And in the act of explaining it to you, she could see some of the incongruities, right? Now, I'm not saying that I will successfully convert, a jihadist, right? Especially not 24 hours before they're about to do their big thing, right? But um, but that is the way in, I think. And you mentioned Daryl Davis, and that's basically what Daryl Davis did.
Yeah.
He sat down with Klansmen and he let them talk and he asked
Yeah.
them questions, and
But
he learned more about them, and he approached from that kind of perspective, and that disarmed them enough to start kind of, as they're explaining, as they're engaging with him, they start kind of analyzing their own point of view. That possibility only exists when you allow for the fact that you're talking to a human being.
okay, like now with the fund, like with the 9/11 bomber, right, or
Hmm.
whatever, just any terrorist the
Yep.
night before or anything like that. Now, what I've read about counterterrorism and what I've read about de-radicalization, and this is even going back to like the gangs in the 80s, like the Crips and the Bloods, and then you had the white supremacists. Basically, they were, even the white supremacists were fighting for drug turf and whatever, right? The skinheads.
Hmm.
But when you do the de-radicalization, it's not a very good book, but it has a couple of insights because this guy converted to Islam, went and joined the Taliban, and like went to Afghanistan. That he was waiting to meet a courier or something, and the courier was late, so he started getting pissed off. So went on the internet and looked up inconsistencies in the Quran. This is how he describes it, and it just planted a doubt. Now,
Hmm.
like, so you're talking about the jihadists, like, okay, no, you're not going to convert that jihadist to an atheist,
Right.
but
At least
if
not
you,
in one sitting.
yeah, but no, but if you actually knew about the faith, like I'm not saying, okay, no, not everyone's gonna have to sit, no one has the time to sit there and read through all this stuff, right? So yes, obviously, but let's say if you knew what the faith was, you could have come at it from a different angle, whereas you can try to plant doubt because you you just need a little bit of doubt to stop a guy from killing himself and a bunch of other people.
Yeah.
You need a lot more doubt for him to stop believing that it's okay to kill the infidel. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There's two different levels there. Right?
Yeah.
Like, there's the people who will go do the Charlie Hebdo, and the people who will cheer it on. You
Mm-hmm.
know, um, so you just need to get that little bit of doubt. And again, when I was speaking to that woman, I mean, I didn't just start off like, oh, blah blah blah, you're queer. I said, because because we've been talking about some of this stuff, so some of these things came up, and I said, look, I did this because I was, and I told her straight out, like I said, wanted to find out why I was being called a white supremacist for criticizing Islam, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm not white, I'm a little more of a cocoa brown or whatever, but like,
Yeah.
and I told her like, okay, this is what I've read, and I had spent uh, at that point, I think about 15 months reading almost nothing but critical race theory and intersectionality, and like I said,
Sounds awful.
I read some queer theory and some gender theory, and I read some of the Foucault stuff when he talks about homosexuality.
Yeah.
um I didn't dive into postmodernism again. I had some of it back in university, and I didn't want to go through that. But yeah, I know, I mean, like I lit I said, like, I want to find out what this stuff is.
Yeah.
And like the first thing I read was white fragility. I'm like, this is nuts. I'm like, why? Where's this coming from? And then I went back to the roots, and I started with like Derek Bell. And there's like one of the books I have. It says, the 25 papers that laid the foundations for critical race theory. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was talking to her about that, and I said, look, I've read this stuff and I kind of understand it, but like I still don't get where this comes from. So I was letting her know that yes, I've read it, and yes, okay, so I think that works a little better than you like. Obviously, if you don't know anything about it and say, can you please explain? I mean, you have to get someone to explain it to you, right? Like you need that. Like if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know anything about it, you
Yeah.
need that there. So you can talk to the guy, you can talk to the suicide bomber, right? The night before. Um, but he's going to give you his version. And
Right.
his version is such a steel trap in his head that he might not see the inconsistencies. Whereas I
Mm-hmm.
was talking to her about it from her perspective, saying, this is what I've read, this is what I know about it. And then I said, okay, just give it to me in plain. Don't try to use the jargon,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted her to take that step. But if you don't have, like, that's why I can't remember who said it. It was a stupid tweet, but someone said, like, reading this stuff is a real waste of time. But unfortunately, to try to understand it and try to you know fight it or whatever, you have to read it.
Yeah.
And I mean, like honestly, if I wasn't on medical leave, I wouldn't have had the time, and I would not have had the patience to
Right.
sit and read this stuff, because it is fairly awful.
I
So I
mean,
mean, like, it depends on where you're coming from. Like, if you know something about it, I think it'd be better to come at it to try to cast doubt
yeah,
in
for
that
sure.
person's mind.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, okay, you have to understand it. But when you're asking someone who's ready to commit suicide bombing, or but like, okay, forget even that. Someone who's ready to go um, to the funeral and cheer on a guy who you know killed a senator, which happened
Right.
in Pakistan. Like, a couple 100,000 people showed up to this the the terrorist funeral.
Yeah.
Okay, when you're ready to do that, you have a very, very steel trap version of your, you have a very closed, narrow version of your faith,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very literal, and it's very, like I said, it is shut like a trap. And like, if you don't know anything about Islam and you get that person to explain Islam to you,
Mm-hmm.
okay, either you're going to run away horrified, or you might say, "Oh, that sounds kind of cool." Like, I mean, I don't think there's any middle ground there. Like, most people will run away scared, and some people might say, "Oh, well, that's cool, I'll join."
Right.
But yeah, like, it's like, that's why I think it's some of these conversations. It's, again, for the audience, whatever, who might not have read any of this stuff. It's better to have, like a McWhorter and a Kendi talking this out, so people in the audience can actually really understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, sorry, I'm just going to rant a little bit more here. Like, I think one of our problems is uh, we don't even know. People haven't taken the time to figure out what their first principles actually are. People say, "Oh,
Mm,
I'm a liberal, or I'm a conservative, or I'm progressive, or whatever," right? Like it just. But have, or I'm for free speech, but like, have you actually sat down and figured out what you mean by free speech? Do you like, personally? I say like the First Amendment is the best law there is to protect you from like the government encroachment.
hmm.
But I think societally, you should try to live by as if the First Amendment applied to you in society. I think
Yeah.
that is the limit where, if you're calling for violence, if you're, trying to conspire to break the law or something like that, that's where the speech is limited. Like obviously, like, Dr. Joe over there, and you say, oh no, he never went to med school, he's going to kill you, blah blah blah. But he's like the best doctor in the country. You just don't like him. Like,
Hmm.
yeah, it's slander and stuff like that. But I don't think people have actually taken the time to look at that. So I think, like, I had a conversation a little while ago with this guy named Ryan Bennett. Ryan's a really cool guy, and he had this idea of a protocol for conversation. I
Mm,
think you should check him out. You try to find him on Twitter. He's not there much, but I think you'd like his idea of protocol. And I said, and it was the same thing I said to him. Like, the first thing you have to do though, before you do that protocol, before you initiate in that conversation, is you have to be aware of where you're coming from. Because I don't think a lot of people do. Like,
mm. Yeah,
I
that's
think a
true.
lot of, I don't think a lot of people, even the people who say, like, okay, we had that exchange recently. He was like, there was, Jay had
Jay
a
Shapiro. Yeah.
screenshot, and like this woman said, blah blah blah, black people can't be racist. Like, well, I don't think they really believe that. In my mind, that was looking back at like the Islam debate, and people
Mm,
say, oh, they don't really believe in jihad. Like, they don't really believe that. I'm like, yeah, they do,
mm.
and it's like, they're being taught this, they're being indoctrinated into it. They're like, they
Yeah.
actually do believe that, and it's, you know, they're so, like, sorry, like, I don't think, like, going into it naively saying, well, I don't think they believe that. Like, I understand where you're coming from, saying you think you want to do good, but it's,
Mm.
we've been through this recently with Islam. Like, let's not go through that again. When people are telling you what they believe, when like you're seeing how far it's going in schools,
Oh yeah.
when you're seeing this stuff coming out, like there was another one recently, I think it was Eric Kaufman who did the study about how people in universities, something like 65% don't want to express their opinion in
Hmm.
the universities. It's like, that's scary.
Yeah.
Like, like you got to start acknowledging that. You got to start acknowledging that
Yeah.
the,
I think
the
I remember that exchange, and I think what Jay was saying was that he wonders if the woman who tweeted that, what she was saying was, um, don't patronize Asian-owned businesses. We should
yeah.
stop, right? And someone said that's racist, and then her response was, I can't be racist because the definition of racist means
Mm.
power plus privilege and prejudice. Uh, so as a black person, I cannot be racist by definition. That was kind of her response there. And then I think what Jay was trying to say was that he wonders if this woman would be as strident and be as willing to say what she's saying to the Asian business owner's face, right? If she was staring at this person in the eyes and saw their response, if she would feel something and maybe be slightly less, you know, zealous. The cover of social media and the fact that she doesn't have to face anybody when she says this stuff. I feel like that's what he was kind of getting at, and I think that I know what he means. I feel like it's definitely harder to stab someone than to just fly over and drop a bomb,
Okay,
right?
yeah, the bravery
There's
of
that.
being out of range, I get
Yeah.
that. But
So there's that, but there's also the thing of, I mean, you literally have people decapitating people on the street for
yeah,
drawing a cartoon, right? So that level of zealotry exists for sure.
but
Uh,
there was also, this was during the, like, this is like last, I don't know if it was before or after George Floyd, but a couple, it might have been after the George Floyd incident. Like, I'm trying to place it because there's so much that went on, but there was a couple of incidents where it was Asian people behind a counter,
Mm-hmm.
and there were black people being racist towards them and blah blah blah. And it's like,
Yeah.
like you got whiteness and this kind of crap. And I mean, like they're saying it straight to them. They're
Oh
videoing
yeah.
it and they're putting it out there. Or like I said, that young woman in I think it's University of Virginia got up and said, you know, all white people out of here because you're making us feel unsafe.
Right.
Now, she believes that
Mm-hmm.
because she's being taught a weird version of safety.
Yeah.
And, you know, but I'm sorry, at some point or other, someone at the university has to call that out and say, like, no, that's explicitly racist. Like, you cannot do that.
Right.
You
But
know, I
we're
mean,
working with different definitions now. That's part of the issue.
yeah, but
Mm-hmm.
that's again the things that like
It makes it difficult to have the communication that's necessary
yeah,
to
when we can
disabuse them
change
of these
definitions that
ideas. Or,
quickly. I mean, when they
right.
change definition of um, what sexual preference with
Right.
Amy Barrett Comey, I mean, like it was in 12 hours.
Yeah.
Like, she said it that evening, and the next morning the dictionary changed the definition. Like
Right. Yeah.
that's scary.
It is. Mm-hmm.
But okay, I think like going from here, that kind of gets into like I think part like the huge part of this problem is the education system, and I think it's at some point like it's got to be acknowledged right now, like especially like what's going on in the like K through 12, like some of like these things that are coming out, and I've been following this for a couple of years, and it's really scary.
Mm-hmm.
So that article you did about lowering the standards, like and I've been seeing this for a couple of years. Like a couple of years ago in New York City, they had I mean,
Yeah.
you can find it. The guy's being fired now, but the person they've hired is even more committed to social justice. Um, but the Carranza or whatever the guy's name was in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
he was. This was in 2018. How asking students to be punctual and asking them to hand their stuff in on time is
Yeah.
not culturally sensitive, and to be culturally sensitive, you shouldn't penalize non-white kids.
Right.
I mean, uh, you know, back when I was a kid, that's what racists said about black and brown people. Oh, they're just lazy. They're never on time. They can't keep us. I mean,
Right.
when I see that, I mean, it makes my blood boil. Or when I read that,
Yeah.
math is a white thing, I'm like, sorry, you're using Arabic numerals that came from India. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it just,
That'd be it. Yeah. It's fundamentally incorrect.
yeah.
But I mean, yeah. I mean, well, first of all, white. What does that mean? It's a mean like these concepts are meaningless. It's nonsense, right? And we kind of we acknowledge that race is a social construct.
Mhm.
We acknowledge that it was just made up, and it was made up by people who wanted to oppress other people as a means to oppress other people, right? But at the same time, we make it the most important thing about every interaction that we can think about, everything that matters, right? Who gets the Oscar, who's starring in this
Yeah.
movie, who gets the Grammy, who gets the job. It's all about this construct that we've already acknowledged is nonsense, and that you know we keep reifying it by underlining it and making it more and more important in every possible scenario you can think of. Now,
See,
there's the argument, of course, which I acknowledge, that yeah, race is made up, but it was imposed upon us, and we are living in the world created by it, and now we need to respond to it. But how you respond to it is important, right? I don't need to, for example, we're living in a society that was heavily influenced by Christianity, right?
mhm.
I don't need to believe Christianity. I don't need to acknowledge Christianity as anything but a belief that, as far as I'm concerned, makes no sense and it has no bearing on reality, right? I don't have to acknowledge any of that to move around in the world and deal with the after effects of the fact that, a lot of this was built by people who believe that, and it's structured in such a way that is reflective of it, right? I don't need to accept it. I don't need to internalize Christianity to move around in a world shaped by Christianity. I can reject the idea completely.
Yeah, but okay, like one thing about the United States, and I'm not going to go as far as like I haven't read the book. I've heard him talk about it a couple of times, so I don't want to come off like saying like I read this book. But I mean, I've heard this debate before, but like the founding myth, right?
Mm.
So no, the founders expressly tried to keep religion out of it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. But where I disagree with that book is the people themselves were highly religious. So
A
the
lot of
murder
them.
laws, like the laws against stealing, the law, like
Right.
all that stuff, that came out of a Christian ethic. Like, okay,
At
that
least of
I,
them, yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
Okay. As far as the founding of the United States and what the founding fathers were trying to do, like if you go back and read all that stuff, yes, they were trying to keep religion out of government as much as possible
Hmm.
and trying to keep government from meddling into religion as well. Like the wall was more from government imposing religion and government meddling into religion, but it's also meant to keep religion out a bit, but that doesn't always work. Um,
Because you can't keep people out, and people are
yeah,
going to drive
exactly.
the ideas over the wall. Yeah.
But um, yeah, no, I get like there is that Christian, and if you want to say more Protestant, depending where you are in the United States, I'd say the majority of the United States is Protestant over Catholic.
Hmm.
Um, it was the same thing like where I grew up in Montreal. It was just, but yeah, like I get all that, and no, you don't have to. It's okay. I remember my father. This was probably about 16 or so because I was working in his factory,
Hmm.
and it was around Christmas time. One of his friends was there, and he was another Muslim guy, and my father's delivery guy came in, like it was his last delivery before Christmas, and he was walking out and came in and said goodbye to my dad, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. And my dad said Merry Christmas to him.
Mm.
And my dad's friend looked at him and said, like, you're Muslim. Like, how can you say Merry Christmas? And my dad's like, what? He goes, yeah, look, Jesus is important in Islam. It's his
Yeah.
birthday. I said, I wished him, I said, it's basically saying happy birthday to Jesus. And
Right.
so yeah, I know you don't have,
I
and
still say bless you, even though
yeah,
I don't believe
okay,
there's anybody doing blessing. You know,
like, no,
it's
but
just polite.
it bugged my dad to no end when they were making like, oh, you couldn't have Merry Christmas at City Hall because that's separation of church and state.
Mm.
You know, I believe religion has no place forming policy, but if you're so weak minded that, Merry Christmas at City Hall is going to turn you into a Christian, like, okay, there's a problem there. That's why some of these things, but
Yeah. Well,
no,
yeah,
sorry, we're getting
we're
way off here, but
yeah,
whatever.
we're off topic, but yeah, I mean, it's just the idea of punctuality being white. I mean, I got this growing up. I'm Dominican. My parents are from the Dominican Republic. I was born here, and 90% I think of Dominicans are of African descent, right? Because there's fucking slaves. It's just,
Yeah.
like there's no escaping this, right? And part of the piece that I wrote is that I had just gotten my ancestry.com results, and it jumps from the Dominican Republic straight to Africa, just boom. Multiple places in Africa, right? Because slaves. It's just the way it is. And a few points in the area of Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, but tons of it is Africa. It's just the way it is, right? And but I would get all this stuff growing up, right? Where it's like, oh, dude, you sound white, right? Because the way that I would speak. Or you listen to white music because I wasn't listening to hip hop. I was listening to, classic rock music. I was listening to Queen in middle school, right? Nobody knew what the hell that was. And I constantly got that thing of like, you're acting white, you're being white. You're not being, what you are. You're not being brown or whatever, Spanish is what we used to say. Uh, and I just never made any sense to me. Like it's just, but I'm just being who I am. Like, how am I not who I am and also Dominican? Right? Clearly that's happening because my behavior doesn't erase my ethnicity, or that this idea that you must perform a certain way in order to be accepted is crazy. And now we move on to these things where punctuality and being good at math and stuff like that is being rerouted and called white as a way to skirt the fact that many people are struggling with this stuff
Yeah.
for various reasons. That's terrible. That's a terrible way to fix a problem.
No, but okay, but that's why I said, like, Kendi's version of it. So like this
Mhm.
thing of teaching maths and teaching reading thing, when I was looking at some of the statistics, only 30% of the people nationally can read at grade level.
Mm.
Got people graduating high school who can't read at a third grade level.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a serious problem.
Yeah.
And getting rid of standardized testing, I'm not saying standardized testing is the answer, it's a silver bullet,
Hmm.
but you need to know where people are. Like,
Right.
maybe you need to go, instead of having a standardized test every month, have the teacher quiz the students like once a week. Like, if you're reading whatever you're reading, like it's English class, right? Whatever you're reading in that class that week, have the teacher quiz the students once a week on that book, so make sure that they get the book, right? Instead of having a standardized test and teach that
Mm.
test once a month or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I mean, but to get rid of it and to just equate it with being white, I'm like, you know,
Yeah.
okay, the Smithsonian had it. They got rid of the graphic, but it's still, you can still find it on their website.
Yeah. I
And
saw that.
there's this thing called Trust Education or Trust something or other, um, and they have this online workshop for getting rid of white supremacy culture in schools. And it's love of the written word, objectivity, professionalism. You
Yep.
know, I'm looking at this. I'm like, okay, I think the Egyptians had some objectivity when they were building the pyramids. You
They
kind
kind
of
of
needed
needed
to
it.
be,
Yeah.
yeah. Like, I mean, you know, and it's just like this is a white way of thinking, and like, the Enlightenment values are white values. There's a
Yeah.
guy, and I read about this recently, and I wish I'd love to go find this guy's writings. Like, his name was Jacob. He was living in Ethiopia, and this is about 100 years before Kant and Hume and all these
Mm.
people. And he fell afoul of the king because he made some criticisms of Christianity or Catholicism or something. And he went and ran away, lived inside a cave. Now, the guy had been trained in local rhetoric, and then he'd also been trained by the Jesuits. And the Jesuits can teach. Like, I'll give him that much. Right?
Mm.
And he came up with the same ideas as, like, they found some of his writings. They came up, he wrote similar things to like Hume and Locke and Paine, and he came up with Enlightenment ideas 100 years before they were in Europe. I mean, these are universal human ideas that have come up over and over and over again.
Yeah.
You know, in
I mean, math works.
Yeah,
The
no,
pyramids are
but
still here, right?
no, but I mean, like, okay, Hume and Locke weren't talking about math; they were talking more about liberty and freedom, and like he was
Sure.
coming up with those kind of ideas. But yeah, math works. Math works. You know, 2 plus 2 is 4. Sorry, the five thing is a little silly. Like, but to say that this is a white thing is to it's to deny yourself your own past. Like, again,
Yeah.
sticking with the, like, going back to the Islam thing, the golden age of Islam, it ended when the Mongols raided Baghdad, but it technically ended about 100 years before that with Al Ghazali, when Al Ghazali said, "We don't need any more new math. We have enough math. We only need math to do what this does." And Al Ghazali was a Sufi, and one of the things of the Sufi aspect of it is everything is done for the glory of Islam and Allah. That
Hmm.
is why everything is done. He took it to an extreme, and I mean, and like, I know Sufis are derided to this day, but like today, but Al Ghazali was given the title "The Proof of Islam," and some people said if you got rid of the Quran and the Hadith, you could rebuild a lot of Islam just from Al Ghazali's writings.
Mm.
Now, so this guy was revered, so he, like, because of him, they stopped that enterprise. Now, if you're going to come here and stop the enterprise because it's it's racist and math is a white thing, and you know, love of the written word is white, and like, I mean, you're setting up a generation for complete and utter failure. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
you
Well, because reality is reality. Whatever you think about it has
exactly.
no bearing, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, the thing that I'm talking about in the piece is, there are problems with standardized tests. I hated standardized tests when I was going through school, right? Because I didn't feel that they adequately they highlighted or encapsulated the things that I was good at, right? I was a creative person. I was, I was a writer. I'm a writer, and you know, I my brain was more in that headspace, right? And I hated school. I hated being there, and I hated these tests. I felt like I was just being checked off as, just a number, right? So there are plenty of things that I can say about the problem with standardized testing, right? And you know what I'm talking about in the piece is actually more conceptual, because I'm responding to what Allison Collins from San Francisco, the Board of Education, what she said in this video that was circulating,
Oh God, yeah.
which was, you know, when we talk about merit and meritocracy, those are racist systems, right? She said something to that effect. And I know what she means, because there are real problems, right? There are reasons why we continue to see certain groups underperforming in certain areas, right? There are reasons for them. And, it's not racist reasons where, it's like, oh, they're just not good. They're just not good enough. No, like the vast majority of them are hobbled from the beginning, because the places where they are going to school are under resourced, right? They're underfunded. The structures are broken, right? There are so many things wrong with with everything around surrounding their upbringing and their education that need to be fixed. People need help. People need better structures. People need better social safety nets. All of these things, right? So the idea of a meritocracy, which is the gun goes off, everybody starts running, fastest person wins, right? Whoever's the best is going to get by. That's the idea of a meritocracy. But that's a fantasy, because nobody starts on the same starting line, right? The race starts, some people are 20 feet ahead of other people based purely on luck, like, the random luck of birth, circumstance, historical reasons for, why certain communities are underprivileged and under resourced, right? So I feel what she's feeling when she says what she's saying. But I make in the piece, I make a distinction between meritocracy, the thing that I just described, and merit, right? And I think that is really important. And I think the failure to make this distinction is where things like being punctual and math is white. That's where that stuff is coming from, right? Merit is, you know like, if you have a push-up contest and 100 push-ups in 2 minutes wins, I can only do 50, I don't win. But if I do 100, I win. That's merit, right? It's like I'm getting off on my own steam. But if you recognize now there's nothing wrong with that, right? So there's nothing wrong with somebody who is extremely good at math getting into a physics program and becoming a physicist, right? There's nothing wrong with that. We want that. We want our society to bring up and highlight people who are extremely capable at wonderful things, right? We want talented surgeons. We want talented musicians, right?
Yeah.
That's merit, right? So here, by analogy, actually, this is a good analogy. So we've heard the story many years ago about symphony orchestra. Somebody asked them, why are there so few women in your orchestra? The person said, I don't even know if this is like an accurate story anymore, but this is the story that I heard. Why aren't there as many women in your orchestra? And the orchestra director said, women just aren't as good. Like, we audition them and they just don't sound as good, right? And so they did an experiment. They started doing the audition process where the musician was behind a curtain and you couldn't tell what they looked like or who they were, and you were literally just listening. And once they implemented that, suddenly more women started making it into the orchestra, right? So that was a problem of bias that was corrected, and now we've solved, right? And blind auditions has become the norm. But now we're in a place where we're looking at the orchestra and we're saying the proportion of people of color is not reflective of the population. Therefore, there must be some horrible racist bias, right? So now let's remove the blind auditions so that we can actually actively place musicians in there, right? And now I'm a musician, and if I knew that I was placed in this New York Symphony Orchestra because of the color of my skin and not because they thought I was a really good musician, I would feel awful about that.
Same. I've said that over and over again. Like, I don't
right?
want a job because I'm brown. I don't want a promotion
Yeah.
because I'm brown. I want it because I'm the
Nobody,
best person. Yeah.
yeah, nobody wants that because I mean, how will it feel, right? Like I would feel inadequate every day. And maybe other people wouldn't, right? So I mentioned that in the piece too. Like maybe it's just me. I know, some people would probably be fine with it. They would think, no, this is just desserts. I deserve this. Okay, great. But I personally would feel terrible if I was given something not because of the merit, not because I was capable and I passed the tests. I passed the, whatever the standard is, I went over the standard and I showed my ability, right? That's important to keep because first of all, just for the personal edification of the people, right? You want them to feel that they've accomplished something. If you just, pick them up and carry them over the finish line, they're not going to feel like they won the race. You can tell them, you can give them the ribbon, right? But they're not going to feel like they did it because they know that they didn't. But there's a way to fix the reason why it's so much harder for people like me to run the race in the first place. That's where we should be focused.
Okay.
That's where we should be putting our attention, is making it so that, back to the symphony orchestra thing. Yeah, let's make it so that there are actually robust music programs in inner city schools where the majority population is people of color, right? So that anybody with the tendency to become a musician has the opportunity. And then they grow up and they're excellent musicians. They pass the audition and they get into the symphony orchestra. That's what we want, right? We don't want to fix it superficially downstream. We want to go upstream, fix the upstream causes so that by the time it gets downstream, it's corrected. That's what we want to do.
So, like, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, and
Mm,
like the whole thing about let's give black students an extra 250 points on their RCTs. We'll take points away from Asian and white kids, right? Like, instead of
mm,
doing that, if you fix the feeder system, so they don't need that bonus, that's going to help. But okay, like I said, do not like critical race theory or the anti-racism that stems from it. But if you go back and you read Bell and Crenshaw,
mhm,
or even people like Peggy McIntosh and things like that, like they could write. Like Crenshaw's a lawyer, Bell was the lawyer. They knew how to write. Like Kendi and D'Angelo are just awful. Okay, and okay, and here's the problem with it. Like I think what Kendi and D'Angelo do is just like awful. Like I don't like Bell at all, but I'll give him some credit here. In one of his papers that he wrote, he talked about the education and he said they shouldn't have desegregated schools, they should have desegregated education.
mm,
Now he goes on further and just said no, they should have kept everything separate. Now I've spoken to this guy named Ian Rowe. Ian's in education. He's run a lot of charter schools. He's starting up another series of charter schools that they're based on like a European baccalaureate system. And I mean, he told me about these things called the Rosenwald schools, and it was, I believe, he told me it was Booker T. Washington. Said, okay, we're going to be segregated. We have to be separate, but segregated doesn't mean have to be lesser. So he went and spoke to this guy Rosenwald. He got him to finance these schools, and some of these schools were comparable with the best white schools in the country. Now, when Brown versus the Board of Education happened, schools had to be desegregated. These schools got shut down.
mm,
Okay, now if instead of shutting down the schools and said, okay, all the schools have to be desegregated, all the schools have to allow either race to come in. And if you're in, an urban center in New York City and you're not around one of these schools and you've got to be bused or whatever, you're in the deep South and you've got to be bused, fine. Okay. That should have been a stopgap measure until you can fix the schools in those neighborhoods. Like that should have been the essential goal. So I see where he was coming from. Like,
mm.
yes, desegregate the education. Like instead of taking kids and busing them for an hour, fix the goddamn school where the kids are at. Right.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
like so that's a my the hugest thing I have with this stuff. And it's not like it's the biggest problem in the world, and it's not like it's the most existential threat, but it gets in the way of solutions.
Mm-hmm.
if instead of trying to fix racism, or we're going to fix the mistakes of the mistakes of the past were the racism. To fix that, just stop being fucking racist. Like, just stop it. Right? Like,
Mm.
let's just get away from race, which I think we were doing. Then around the mid to late '90s, it just flipped back again.
Yeah.
But get rid of that whole racecraft thing. But don't look at solutions on a racial basis, because I
Right.
understand that, I can look at a way of looking at reparations by investing far more heavily into the communities, like, into Black communities where they were affected by slavery and Jim Crow and whatever, like, and in that community now, in that neighborhood that used to be predominantly white, there might be Latino, there might be, like, poor white people, there might be whatever. But
Yeah.
you fix that neighborhood, you fix that community, you help everyone out. But it's fixing those communities.
Right.
And it's not just putting in a school, it's putting in a school, putting in a community center, putting something for kids to do,
Yeah.
investing in business. So it's a kid's not walking a couple of blocks, with bullets going on around him, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot to be fixed here.
Yeah.
But just focusing on the race and say, we're going to solve racism. The problem is racism. We have to solve racism. The problem is the disparity. The
Right.
problem is why the disparity is there. Let's look at
Yeah.
the disparity. And
Yeah.
that's where I see the CRT stuff, the anti-racism stuff. If you want to talk about transgenderism, or like any of the, like, the social justice education field, if you want to talk about any of those things, they put the focus on the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And there's, like, climate change arguably is one of the biggest threats we're facing. You're
Hmm.
not going to fix climate change if you throw in climate justice and say, oh, you know what? People of color are more affected by climate change, so we have to fix that first. Because you can't fix that first.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. The thing is, yeah, I see it as unnecessarily creating enemies. Right. It's like if we just focus on poverty, right? We focus on let's fix this. Let's figure out ways to fix poverty. Right. We want to stop people from suffering this way. You're going to disproportionately help Black people, Hispanic people, right? Because they are disproportionately represented among the poor, right? So you're going to do the thing you want to do anyway, but you're going to do it in a better way. And you're going to have more allies because you're avoiding this completely unnecessary conversation, right? If you're focusing on fixing poverty, you're going to help poor Black people. That's
Yeah.
just going to happen. You're also going to help poor white people. They deserve help too,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no reason to deny it of them, right? It would be immoral to do that. So this is what I mean is if you like, there are better and worse ways to fix problems. There are deeper and shallower ways to fix problems. And sometimes the shallow ones feel better. They feel faster. Kind of like what we were talking about earlier about, we could solve the homeless problem in 1 year for $5 million. We're just going to kill them all, right? That's a shallow problem. That's a shallow solution, and it causes deeper problems, right? Because now you have this murder policy, right? That it's already heinous and terrible. How much worse can it possibly get? Who knows, right? This is what I mean is when we focusing on climate change through the lens of race. I haven't read anything on this. I don't understand how that makes any sense. Because there's only one planet, right? There's not like Earth for Black people and then Earth for white people. There's just Earth. So we should probably just figure out how to fix
Yeah.
Earth. How to make it so Earth doesn't, eliminate us by
No, but
flooding our cities and things like that. And we're going to do the thing you want anyway because that's part and parcel of the solution. So it
yeah,
seems
like,
like people are thinking so short term because they want these they they're I don't know. I mean, they're looking for ways to highlight things that they consider important, and I consider them important too. But there's just better ways to fix this, right? There's,
yeah,
if you solve poverty, you have just helped more Black people than anyone has ever helped in history. right?
Okay, but like, let's say you want to work on both, right? I know Biden's talking about how green technologies will create jobs, but
Hmm.
like any, okay, this is way off topic here, whatever, but shouldn't like no climate policy without nuclear is going to work. Like, I mean,
Right.
it's the cleanest energy. It takes the least amount of space. Like hydro is, I guess, technically the cleanest, but the amount of flooding you have to do to create the dam and all that causes all kinds of other damage.
Hmm.
Like nuclear power plants are small. They're getting better. They're more efficient. There's less weight. Like blah blah blah. They're okay. If you start that and do that construction, you're going to need construction workers. You're going to need people, like you're going to create jobs, and you
Hmm.
might create little towns like how the suburbs got built, little towns that were built, like, so you might create little towns around those nuclear power plants. But you have a country like India that's saying that by 2050, we're going to have an electric grid going across the whole country. Because right now you still have in
Yeah.
little small communities, people burning dung, people burning wood, and it's just, a lot of pollution. But India is going to go to coal. India is not, they're not going to be terribly environmentally friendly.
Hmm.
Um, but if you start putting in nuclear power plants here, you could sell them to India. You can, you have people trained here. You can go there. You can train them. That's getting India the energy it needs, because India has a lot of energy problems. Like, I go
Hmm.
there every couple of years, and Jesus Christ, it's like you lose power for about a couple hours every day. Like
DR's
it's
like that too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you get you get stuff like that. I mean, this fixes getting people jobs is going to help fix poverty.
Yeah.
Like you could, you obviously not going to train everyone to be a nuclear engineer, but like I said, just at least in the construction thing, at least, it all that stuff. There's work. There's work after the fact. Um, I don't know. Like I remember when I was finishing high school, there was still the vocational option, and it wasn't given that much of a disparaging thing. Like now, I find that people,
Yeah.
you have to go to college. I was speaking about this with someone the other day, and I was just like, some of my friends who are in the trades, okay, if I take a look at my friends who are in the trades and my friends who did university, there's a larger percentage of the ones in the trades that are better read than the percentage of the ones who did like a master's and he just focused on like, I got an MBA and they just focused on business.
Right.
Like like the guys in the trades actually are better read and like more informed.
They make a
But
lot of money too.
yeah, okay, but like I don't see what I don't know what the stigma around that was, and I don't know why it's been given such a bad stigma. Like,
Yeah.
being a carpenter is a noble profession. I mean, like, and to work as a carpenter, to work as a mechanic, to work as
Hmm.
a lot of the stuff in the trades, like, you can't be a carpenter if you don't know math.
Right.
Like, you can teach a kid carpentry and math at the same time.
Right.
Like you can, like, I like I said, there's so much stuff that goes on in the background, and I think when we get down to that univariant thing, like, oh, this is homophobia, oh, this is racism, oh, this is sexism, oh, this is, like, now that I spoke to you about the star manning, like I get that and I understand it, and I still have like, I think you see like a slight reservation. I get that, like I fully get that. I accept that you think you're doing good.
Hmm.
Like I get that. Like starting off from that, that's a great thing, but because I still think in certain cases there's there's something there, um but yeah, like like that's where that's my problem with all this stuff. Is it's not the biggest issue that we have to deal with.
Yeah.
It is the biggest impediment to the big issues that we have to deal with.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's annoying that we have to get through this thing. There's always this thicket that we need to hack through just to get to the actual point and the actual problem. And there's so much talking past one another. There's so much confusion. The responses that I've gotten to the Newsweek piece about this merit thing. Um, I mean, I get where people are coming from. I've been accused of being insensitive, which I really don't think I am. I mean, I'm a part of this community that everyone is talking about. So, you know, it's it's I've been accused of not understanding the way things work, And really all I'm saying is, hey man, look, I get that, you know, I and people like me, you know, people of color are underprivileged. I get that they start way behind because of things completely outside of their control. I illustrate that in the piece. I go to great lengths to show that I understand that, right? And my only point is, look, help me get sneakers because it's not my fault that I can't afford them, right? Help me get the training I need because I live in a place where it's not on offer and I didn't have anything to do with that. The structures are broken. My education system is broken, right? So give me those things, and then let me run the race myself. Let me try to win it myself. Don't pick me up and carry me over the finish line. Don't move the finish line to where I'm standing, right? That doesn't help me. That doesn't make me feel any better. It makes me feel worse. And I understand that you're trying to help me, but the first place trophy means nothing because you've given it to me under false pretenses. That's the part about merit that we need to keep because it matters, not just because of how I feel, but also because, we need the people who are surgeons to know how to do surgery, right? We can't go down this road where we're just handing things to people, right? Not nobody's really saying that, but this is like the logical kind of end point that I'm seeing. Is like, all right, well, we're just giving people things because they want them, or because we need to have some kind of superficial parity by race, by racial makeup. You're not correcting the problems. You're not correcting the reason why there's a disparity, right? If there is one,
Yeah.
you're not correcting it by doing this. You're basically you're implementing something that you're going to have to continue to do over and over again, right?
And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you fix the feeder system, you wouldn't
Right.
have to give those 250 SAT scores or
Yeah,
whatever it is. Like,
because we are just as capable as
yeah,
anybody else,
exactly. And I mean,
but we can't do it because we're hobbled. But you're not
yeah,
fixing the hobbling. You're just kind of dragging us over.
and you know, I think this is going to be a good place to stop. I don't want to keep you too long, but
Sure, sure.
but yeah, no, I think that's just it. Like, I want, I've never wanted special treatment. You know,
Yeah,
like obviously, I don't want to be treated good or bad, like differently in a good way or in a bad way because of the color of my skin.
right.
I
Same.
just want to be treated like everyone else. Like,
Yeah.
like, as far as I could, like, and luckily in Canada, there was not a lot of overt racism. Like, I've dealt with it, but
Hmm.
here was more of the low expectation stuff. And like,
Right.
that bugs me. Like, you know, that what you were talking about with the, getting rid of merit or just hiring someone just because they're, the population's 13% black. We need 13% black, you know, violinist or whatever. Like, like,
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
it's like, that is insulting. Like that, someone calling me a packy, I can deal with because it just makes me think that person's just ignorant. And,
Right.
like, I feel, but this condescending, oh, we'll take care of you. We'll make, like, no,
Hmm.
no, no. Like, that's even worse. It's just like,
Yeah.
I hate that.
Well,
Like I said, I don't want to keep you too long. So if you got any last words about
sure.
either starmanning or what you were talking about in your Newsweek
Well,
piece, or
I'll put them together,
yeah,
right? So I know that what these people are doing is trying to uplift minority communities for very good reasons because they have been underprivileged, they have been historically disadvantaged, and we can see the results of that, right? So the intentions there are good, and I feel them, I feel that, but there are unintended consequences to the way that we go about doing this stuff. These approaches are superficial, they're often nonsensical, and they end up harming the people that they're trying to help inadvertently, right? No one's trying to do this, but this is what's going on, right? I no longer if I'm given these things, if I feel like a diversity hire, right? I don't know if my application was good. And I want to know. I want to know if my application was good. I can handle it. You know, as a writer, you get used to rejection. You get used to being, you know, not even responded to, let alone rejected, right? Like you don't hear back. You pitch something or you send an essay out, you just don't hear back, right? But you also just hear, this isn't right for us, sorry. And I'm like, oh man, what about it was wrong? Let me try to fix it. Let me try to get better. That's the way, right? That's the way the world works, but that's also just the way that it needs to be, because we need to have standards for quality. We need to have standards for ability. We need to have standards for capacity. And if there is a group that isn't meeting those standards, that's a problem, right? We have to find why they're not meeting those standards and fix that. We don't simply say the standard itself must be the problem, right? 100 push-ups is a good standard. Let's not lower it because a certain group of people can only get to 50. Or lowering it to 50 is not helping them do any better. Maybe, figure out what their diet is. Maybe figure out, do they have a gym? Can they train? What's their routine like? Let's figure out why they're not measuring up, because there is no, biological reason why they can't. So something must be going on that we can fix. Let's do it. Let's fix it. So again, we have a common project, but different methods, and let's figure out better methods.
All right, cool. That's a good place to end. Well, thanks a lot for coming on.
Well, thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back.